So, tonight's going to be about character development, which I have probably literally thousands of characters that I've made for various games and story ideas and been working on for years and years and years. Nothing's really it's hard to kind of codify all that stuff in your head after a while, though. But I think we'll have a good time with this one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
It won't be another marathon.
And you're a character.
Yeah.
So
I'm a powerful character.
Mm-hmm.
So with no Sean Ed here,
yeah,
we're gonna have to try and limp through this as best we can.
Three-legged.
Yep.
Like a three-legged dog.
Yep. Although it will be nice that we won't have to tell him when we go outside afterwards that he needs to use outside voice at way too late o'clock.
He'll appreciate that call out.
Yeah. So, well, let's roll the music.
All right.
Hey everybody, welcome to Friday Night Rides, a podcast about storytelling. My name's Fuzz, with me as always is Jonesy.
Hey everyone.
And Friday Night's alumni Skip.
How's it going?
Tonight we're going to talk about character development, how to develop character. But first, we're going to talk about our massive screw-up of NaNoWriMo and our general failure at life.
It's going to be a while.
Yeah. Life just got in the way too much. I wish I had, I feel like if I just had another, 20, 30 solid hours that I could have just dedicated to writing, that I'd have been able to get it. But, I guess I can't really complain. I got a hell of a lot done, and I'm proud of what I got done. I'm happy with it. I just, it is the same thing every year. Every year when NaNoWriMo rolls around, it's like, yeah, I'm going to do NaNoWriMo. I'm going to crush it. I can do 50,000 words in a week. And then I get down to it, and it's November, the dumbest month of the year, to do something that says, hey, you have to dedicate countless hours of your life to doing something that isn't getting ready for the holidays.
Right.
I just want to find the NaNoWriMo people and slap them and say, do this in March,
when
March, no one cares.
March, yep.
Yeah.
And that is hard, and that's what bogged me down a little bit. But I think more what bogged me down was not planning enough. And I know I talked about it on the podcast and everything, but I learned a valuable lesson about planning and what I need as far as that outline or that roadmap to go forward, and to sit down every day, and so that I can sit down every day and I know this is what I need to write about today. Yeah. And I think if I had been a little bit better prepared, because I had pretty good momentum going, and then once I started hitting those walls of, okay, what am I going to do here? Well, I haven't built this yet. This only exists in my mind, and it's just a loose idea there. So I think that takeaway for me was really valuable.
Yeah.
I'm a little disappointed that I wasn't able to stick with the writing every day thing, and that was kind of a big goal of mine through it. But, we'll get them next year. I have no doubt in my mind that I'll be able to come back to it and go for it. And I'm not letting what I've worked on sit. I've made a lot of progress. I'm happy with what I've written. So I've personally made it a goal, which this may be stupid too, because December's even dumber than November is. But my goal is to get finished what I have planned, prepared, everything like that by Christmas.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm looking at.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I went through. I had written up a complete outline, a real detailed outline of every scene, block by block by block, through the whole 12 episode kind of arc. And what a lot of it boiled down to was just getting off of work or getting home and just being like, yeah, I could sit and write, but I'm beat to hell. I gotta unwind. I gotta relax for a bit, all that good stuff. And so, I've kind of made the same thing, by Christmas, I want to have mine done. I'm loosely shooting for the middle of the month to have mine done, because I know that if I keep saying, I'll wait till Christmas, it'll be like, I'll wait till...
It'll be December 20th, and you'll be like, well, I better start writing, I guess. I got 5 days.
So it's just like, meh. But, it was a fun exercise. I'm glad I did it. Yeah. I wish that I would have gotten more out of it, but what have you. It happens.
Yeah. It was nice to do it with somebody, to be able to talk about it and help each other out where we could and stuff. So that was helpful to me anyway. So before we go any further, I'd just give that quick introduction that we do every week. But we are FridayNightWrites.net. It's the website that we started and manage. It's a writing community that strives to drive a conversation about storytelling. Our goal is to encourage everyone in our community to write, provide feedback, and to grow as writers. So, it's for writers from every level, from every stripe, beginning to whoever feels comfortable putting their stuff out there. Please give us a visit whenever you can. We're going to be getting back into providing a lot more content here in the next few weeks. NaNoWriMo's worn down. We don't have that excuse to use anymore, so we're going to try to get some more going on the site. Also, we're on Facebook at facebook.com/FNWrites. You can give us a like there. Periodic updates about the website, podcast updates, everything like that. News, all that good stuff is posted on there. We're on the Twitters at twitter.com/FNWrite. The only thing really that gets posted there are podcast updates, but I want to start using it a little bit better.
That'll change, I think, by the time Christmas is over.
Yeah.
And we've all got, a little more time on our hands, This is the same thing that happened to us last year. Mm-hmm. When we were doing all this stuff privately, we crashed and burned in November and then came back around early spring. So.
Right. And I think it'll start, the activity on there will start ticking up quite a bit. We're on YouTube, youtube.com/FNWrites. All the podcasts are posted there in video form. That's where we started with the podcast. So we still put those up there every week. They drop usually on Thursday morning. Our podcast feed is at podcasts.fridaynightwrites.net. You can put that into your favorite podcast program, and it should pick everything up. Also, we're on iTunes. You can search for Friday Night Writes. It is the Friday Night Writes podcast. If you'd like to provide any feedback or hate mail or comments or anything like those, please direct those to fnwrites@gmail.com. And if you enjoy the podcast, please tell your friends. That'd be helpful.
Yeah.
Nice word of mouth. Or you can leave us a review on iTunes or YouTube, and you can subscribe in both of those places also. So a little bit of housekeeping real quick, too. Since we have talked about it, stuff is ramping up a little bit. We're all getting busy for the holidays and everything like that. We've decided that we're going to cut the podcast at a season 1, quote unquote, after the next podcast. So this week we're going to do character, and next week we're going to cover Star Wars appropriately. So after the Star Wars episode, we plan on taking a few weeks off for the holidays. Plan on, you'll still hear from us. We'll be dropping lines on Facebook and everything like that, and on the website, so we won't have disappeared completely. But just as far as the podcast goes, we'll take a few weeks off to recharge, come up with some more content, come up with some more ideas for episodes in the future. So, characters.
Skip?
Yeah, well, character development, as with any story, depending upon whichever, no matter what medium you're using it in, be it comic books, be it film, be it theater, be it professional wrestling, be it in novel form.
We get to talk about professional wrestling tonight.
Can probably
Might as well.
We could probably address.
That's what I was just going to bring up. Is that Skip is a Ren Fair aficionado, and you're a former professional wrestler yourself, and I'm a complete phony. So we're all good at character development.
Yeah, that's true. Why don't we take a quick break and come back and we'll talk all about it.
Sounds good.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
We'll be right back.
Welcome back. We're going to get started discussing character development and the importance of a good character development when it comes to how you want to affect the story itself. There are two basic schools of thought in regards to a lot of storytelling and character development. There's the general character versus your detailed character. A recent study they had done, I had read about, that I found kind of fascinating, in particularly about like the general characters and how you incorporate both general and detailed into the same story. The example that was given was the Twilight series. It was kind of an interesting take on because it's a study on the popularity of the books and how it came about and why these are so popular with the target audience being teenage girls. And the discussion was based around the characters themselves. The female lead in the story was so generically written. This allowed the reader to actually kind of put themselves into that position, while every male character in the story was so incredibly detailed. So you really got a feel for who Edward was, or who what was the werewolf?
Team Jacob, baby.
Yeah, Edward and Jacob, whatever. But the two characters, those characters were so overly detailed, and it allowed the generic character to really kind of allow the reader to really kind of put themselves into that position, and in turn then kind of get a better experience as that character in the story.
It's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that they were saying, I know you're not a huge Matrix guy, but one of the things that they were consistently kind of touting about the Matrix was that Keanu has a tendency to be so wooden that he had that same effect, that you were able to easily put yourself in his shoes because he wasn't an overly developed character. He was someone who was being sort of drug along, by the leash, and and everyone can sort of sympathize with that.
And I think that's honestly a pretty well known or well returned to practice, in that a lot of your heroes, your protagonists, are every man or every woman, or whatever the case may be. They're just normal people. Now, yes, granted, you have the hired assassin type characters that end up being heroes and everything like that, but there's always an aspect of a hero, of a story, of a good hero, of a good character that makes them relatable. So they are the everyman that I can put myself into their shoes. Yeah. And we didn't get to it last week when we talked about comics, but Unbreakable. Bruce Willis, boom, right then and there. I mean, he's in Philadelphia. That's a big blue collar town, and he's just a security guard. He's a blue collar guy. All of that stuff was readily recognizable for people watching it. Yeah. And they were able to project themselves into it.
And also, though, most importantly, which I think was what Skip was getting at, was that the performance of the character, whether it be in the book or on film, was so undefined. Like, it's easy to develop a character and just kind of say, he's a blue-collar guy, he works hard for his family, he cares, but he's in a wrecked marriage, everything's starting to fall apart, and he may have superpowers. go. And that was the thing. And it was the same thing with Twilight, was that the Bella character was so she was so unremarkable other than being, attractive, that, her character didn't really have any, there wasn't any polish on her. There wasn't any fine detail. They didn't really go through and hammer out, that like the Ramones was her favorite band or whatever it was. They didn't really dig in to her as a character, and the juxtaposition of that versus all the other characters that surrounded her, that had extensive background. They had, all kinds of additional information about them that defined them, made it much more accessible for a casual viewer or casual reader to step into those shoes and then go along for the ride, because you could impart your own things on those characters.
Yeah.
And you sort of internally bring them to life rather than have a writer sit down and, do that for you. Because and again, this goes back to the role-playing thing. That's one of the problems that I consistently have with certain players over the years, is that I would run into a player who had played, like, say, D&D or something like that, who would say, I want to build my own character. And I would say, no. First of all, I'll build the character because I'll build the character properly, in accordance to what the game requires. If I put if I give you the reins, chances are there's going to be some min-maxing. Chances are there's going to be some degree of screwing around that you're not aware of, but I am. So let's talk the character over first, and then I'll design the character based on your specific needs. But don't sit down and develop the character yourself, because when that happens, what you get in your head when you start developing characters is, oh man, his wife died 10 years ago, and his daughter was stolen by orcs, and he's been on a mad hunt to find her ever since, and he has a scar across his forehead that he got while battling a displacer beast, and yada yada yada, and all kinds of nonsense. And what that player doesn't know is that I might not have taken any of that into account, or there might not even be a displacer beast in this world.
Right.
There could be all kinds of things that now that you've developed the character and you've become attached to that build, that now as the game master I have to come in and say, no, sorry, like this isn't going to work because of this, and this. We have to alter it. We have to change it. Whereas by making a generic character, like Skip might say, yeah, I want to play a speedster in the Mutants and Masterminds game. And I say, okay, cool. Do you have any specifics? No, not really. I just want him to be a speedster. Okay, cool. So then that way I can give him what is literally just stats on a sheet, a literal generic character, just with a name, some stats, some abilities, and say, okay, she's all yours. Develop as you see fit now. Give it a game so that you can kind of ease in and understand what this world is about. And then once you've done that, feel free. Expand on everything you want. Develop your own character. Develop all kinds of stuff. Have fun with it. But, give it time. So that way, once he plays that first game, he's going to be like, okay, cool, here are my abilities. Here's what I can do. And other characters, other players around him are going to be able to go, okay, cool, this is what this guy's all about. This is how this guy handles business. And so, and I know it's kind of a tangent, but at the same time, I think it's still applicable because, when you're developing stuff on your own, you do have a tendency to want to dig in to these kind of juicy details that makes a character really important.
What's malleable.
Yeah, And whereas more often than not, the smartest thing you can do is kind of create a half blank canvas and sort of make it so that whoever's involved is going to be the one who's going to come in and they're going to put in the finishing strokes. They're going to be the one who really kind of crystallizes the image for you, so that you don't have to really you have to do it.
And in a gaming environment, that's kind of, I mean, I've admittedly in the past years and years and years ago, when I used to play regularly with some friends, we had, I was admittedly, I was one of those who would overly develop a character. It got to the point that it was kind of a joke. I still remember one game in particular coming in and me sitting down to play, and the other three guys all have binders that they had made to make fun of me with their characters, with like charts of annual hair growth and just ridiculous shit, just to make fun. It's like, all right, I got the point, guys. I get it. But with a gaming type of situation like that, it's always good to start with a very generalized character and let the details flow generically as you're playing. However, with storyline wise, with a novelization or something along those lines, a defined story, you really kind of have to have some of that information already lined out, and that's where you really kind of look at the detailed characters, and that's where depth of character really comes in. And when you have those, we've kind of discussed generic characters, but to make a character as believable as possible is a whole nother mindset. You have most of my character development, came about, as you mentioned. I was a performer with the Texas Renaissance Festival. The thing about doing that, as opposed to any other type of theater, is you have your character and you're out for 12 hours a day. You're in the crowd of people. And at TRF, we had upwards of 30,000 people a day in the park. So you're in the middle of a crowd of 30,000 people, and those people could come to you and at any moment ask you any question, and you had to stay in character about it. So you really had to develop who you were to the point that you start looking at every minor detail, the tiniest little things, because you don't know when the person's going to come up to you and be able to say, and just ask you, hey, what's your favorite food? Well, why is that your favorite? And you've got to have an answer, or at least be as confident with the details of your own character to the point that you could easily improvise and confidently improvise an answer if you had to. But it was things you would have to have those moments just instantaneously. You would go, oh, I love apple pie because the smell of apples just takes me back to my childhood and growing up on the farm in Sussex, and just having these you having that type of in-depth detail to the character is what made it real. Storyline wise, there are some instances like that. You have Stephen King is known for his incredibly detailed characterizations, which add to the realism of the story. And it's one of those things where when it comes to writing, or in any real medium, if you have an unbelievable character or a character that you don't know enough about, it makes the remaining story harder to swallow.
I can see that. I think, though, that the real kind of the real meat of a good character, especially like if you're talking about like someone with a lot of detail, a lot of background, all that good stuff, is that that you kind of have to hit on the times. Like if you're writing a story about the 80s or set in the 1980s, doing a sort of Wall Street-ish tycoon, that's an obvious bet, but doing one now is I don't think would be I think it would be kind of apropos of nothing.
Well, the reason that I think the reason that you feel that way is because when you think of Wall Street tycoon, you think of the Liar's Poker guys from the Michael Lewis book, or the Michael Douglas from Wall Street. Those guys, or the Glengarry Glen Ross, or whatever.
I was also thinking of Homeboy from Mr. Robot.
Yeah.
And Batman when he was the psychotic running around
American Psycho.
Yeah. I mean, exactly, and that's that era Wall Street guy. But there's Wall Street tycoons now. They're just not that same guy necessarily.
Yeah.
You
That's the thing.
And I think what that kind of does is, I guess that's maybe archetyping.
Yeah.
But I think that even in in moderation, I think that's just. I think it's kind of still just as important.
Oh, sure, because that's a jumping on point for everyone.
Yeah.
So everybody's got that same frame of reference, and that character's readily recognizable. Now, you can call it lazy, but I don't think it is, because again, you're throwing something out there where this guy's Michael Douglas from Wall Street. I know who this guy is.
Well,
I know who he is.
But you can't really say it's lazy in regards, because either way, if you're going to make a character develop to the point that it's realistic and believable, even if you just go, well, it's a Michael Douglas type character, well, you still have to do some research into what does that entail.
Sure.
What does that job? What are the aspects of that job? What do those people live
what
like?
does a day trader do?
Exactly. You have to know those details. That's one of the things Crichton, as a writer, is amazing about, really researching and understanding the details of what he's writing. And he pushes those through amazingly.
And yet Dan Brown is not. He just sort of makes it up. He's like, oh yeah, he's a guy who's hunting down Jesus stuff. That's it. That's what this guy's all about. Oh, okay. Fair enough. I'm just going to make up a bunch of scurrilous historical facts and throw it together and drive.
But if you don't present it in a realistic way, it's not believable.
Then you're boned. But I think with a lot of detailed character stuff. I mean, like for me with Autumnville, knowing that this first sort of season that I'm writing is going to be really heavily based on characters that are based on us. And we're all working class guys. None of us, with the exception of the Riz, are people who make $1 billion a year. And so it's like, when I write Lowell or when I write Vic, I write them as very, very blue collar. Everything about them is very blue collar. Lowell more so than Vic. Vic being the smarter of the two has always got plans, things like that, whereas Lowell's always struggling, very much like me. So, I always find that those things, help to work out. Plus, and don't get me wrong, I'm not talking trash about anything, but your characters like Batman and Superman, for example, are, as characters, obviously they're hyper developed, but the core of them, they're not blue collar guys.
Well, and to say those characters are hyper developed is kind of not totally accurate either. So when you really look at the dynamics between like a Batman character versus any of the villainous characters that he faces, when people ask about Batman, what does everybody say? Vigilante, his parents died, trained, dresses as a bat to scare people. He's also a billionaire, Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, wears a rubber.
Those are nipples.
Fights crime.
Those are the details people really focus on. That's kind of it, and that's really all you really have to go with. Now there are certain arcs, of course, where they tinge and they add little things, and but really that's the character. Whereas the villain, the rogues gallery he fights, those characters are. You've got Mr. Freeze, and you've got a detailed.
Very much so. I agree. I agree, but in the same vein, though, those are characters that are so well defined that further definition can almost err on blasphemy. Little things like back in the 90s when they gave Superman a mullet. And it wasn't necessarily a bad look. The artists who were doing it apparently they knew how to put together a good mullet,
and it worked for Nick Cage.
But the thing is that the fans went absolutely bananas over such a small change in character,
right?
Which I think is always tragic, because that's one of the problems being a comic book aficionado. And and enjoying the entire culture. One of the things that I absolutely despise about the culture is that
the fanboys.
Yeah, is that you have these fanboys who are just absolutely committed to seeing absolutely nothing change.
Right.
And and it gets so tedious after a while. It was one of those things that when people talk trash about the first Hulk movie, they were like, "Oh, it's so stupid," and I was like, "It's genius." They were like, "Oh, Superman Returns was stupid, the kid and all the other stuff," and I was like, "No, that's genius. Like, that's ballsy move, giving Superman a kid. You know, like,
well,
is it the smartest thing to do? No." But it was a ballsy move. It was a really genius thing to do, to say, yeah, Superman's got a kid that he didn't know about.
It's one of the things I find fascinating. Staying on the comic book vein right now. When you have those character changes that totally flip it on its ear. Mm-hmm. One of the most brilliant arcs I think I've ever seen in the Batman genre was the Flashpoint series. There was an issue, I think it was 3 issues long, where in this Flashpoint alternate universe, Bruce Wayne was the one that died. Yeah. And you find Thomas out Thomas was the Batman. It was just I thought it was so fascinating. But then to find out Martha was the Joker was just blew my mind. I was just cool. Like, that's amazing. She blames him, Thomas, for the death of their son. And it drove her insane. That's brilliant. And it was a complete character change on all points.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I know we're getting off on a tangent. Yeah. We'll bring it back. But the thing is that, one of the things that when you're developing characters, at least that I've found personally, is maintaining a degree of flexibility that is frankly unrealistic. You have to be willing to, as a writer or as a performer or whatever it may be, you have to be willing to let these characters roll with the punches and change according to environmental stresses and or just storyline concerns.
A lot of that comes with the length of the project.
Yeah,
that's one of the things where, like I say, if you're in a defined a one story kind of novelization, you've got this brief period of time. If you're looking at several books, a series or like comic books or that way, you have a lot more time frame to kind of let little details slip. And it's one of the things I find so fascinating is there are those little things, those inconsequential details that come back to you because it's. I always find it fascinating when I hear people bitch about something in a movie or a show or something where they it's like there's a moment where the protagonist sits down, he's enjoying an apple pie, and he just kind of spend 20 minutes just because of this apple pie. It was and then it doesn't go anywhere from there. And you see these people who are just like, well, they spent all this time on this goddamn apple pie, but it didn't pay off on anything. It did. It paid off brilliantly because that's a detail about that character that you remember. Yeah. It doesn't have to have any substance in the overall story. It doesn't have to have
everything
any
doesn't have to be a plot device.
It's just something that makes that character relatable in a way. And those are those details that I just always find fascinating. And when people complain about it without realizing that you've exactly fallen into the trap, if you're talking about that, then you remember that detail about that character.
Yeah, that's very true.
Well, in this, we kind of skirted around this a little bit there, but, you want to see a character grow. Mm-hmm. No matter, even if it's a comic book, how many different stories have there been of Batman?
Right.
When you're done reading it, you want there to have been a lesson, or you want the character to have grown in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, you can't just tell the entire character in the first chapter and then
the conflict is meaningless then.
Right.
If the character doesn't come out the other side changed somehow,
exactly, then
why did we even take this trip in the first place?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think that that's like one of the as far as characters go, it may not be a development, but when you do develop your character, have in mind that this character needs to grow, especially if it's one of your main characters.
Yeah,
obviously.
Well, it's always important that when you're creating the world for your character to kind of be living in, is that you develop crucibles and confrontations and complications for every character, even if they're just the ATM at the end of the block is a pain in my ass. Every time I try and get money out of it, I got to kick it and scream and punch it, and then finally it'll spit out my cash. Or if it's a Biff Tannen style crucible / complication where you're up against another physical opponent, or if it's just that, you know, you're having economic difficulty, the character's, you know, is having a rough time, he's trying to find a job or whatever. Like, there's always got to be complication, there's always got to be crucibles for these characters to overcome. Otherwise, you know, you do kind of fall into these sort of kind of strangely idyllic, you know, sort of non-stories that a lot of comic books do fall into recently, where characters don't really have anything to overcome because they're so powerful or they're so smart or what have you. They've already overcome virtually everything that they can, and now the writer is just spinning wheels, waiting for the next event to kick in.
Yeah.
But I know for me personally, whenever I'm writing, whenever I'm developing storyline, the first thing that I try and do before I even start developing anything is try and figure out what the crucible is for this story. You know, and if there's going to be multiple characters, does there need to be multiple crucibles that multiple characters have to get through? Are they going to band together and do a sort of, you know, stupid, Guardians of the Galaxy ending where, you know, friendship wins the day, let's hold hands and we'll defeat the bad guy? You know, like how are we going to put that together? And, you know, so then that way, by the time I start working on storyline, I've already figured out what my crucible is going to be and what a lot of my complications are going to be, so that when it comes time to plot, to develop the bullet points of all of my plot, those complications fall right into the 3-act structure. I know exactly where to put them, all that good stuff, so that by the time I actually get down to the work of writing, I can actually block it out into much smaller segments, knowing that writing 10,000 words in a day is going to be tough, but writing 2,500, not so much. And more importantly, if I'm really having a good day, I can do 2 or 3 bouts of 2,500 words in a day. You know, so, like, especially if I'm hyped to get to that next part, you know. And if you develop your story that way, you know, in smaller nuggets, and you develop your characters, or you have the character prepared to develop during these little crucibles and complications, then, you know, you have a much more, at least for me, you have a much more fun writing it, because you're
well, it's a concept of multiple characters having their own individual stories, and it's just interweaving.
And not only is the story easier to tell then, because you give a shit about your characters, your readers are going to give a shit about your characters too, and they're going to enjoy the story more. And I think, I mean, me personally, when I read fiction specifically, if I don't have anything at stake with any of the characters, I'm not going anywhere.
But it was something that you were saying to me last night when we were watching Game of Thrones. And it was something that I thought about because I got home and I cracked open Dr. Sleep. And I realized, have you read Dr. Sleep by any chance? Okay. Because you were talking about having read that Wendig Star Wars book recently. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how he put it together because I haven't looked at it yet. But in Dr. Sleep, you will have these sort of mini chapters that run through the entire book, and almost none of them are multiple pages long. You know, like, I mean, there are a few that might take up a page or two, but that's it. And then it's a cut, you know, there's a new number, and then you're rolling into a different scene. And it dawned on me that I read Dr. Sleep in 3 days, and it's a meaty book. It's not a little book by any stretch. And then when you go back to, say, Game of Thrones, where you have a singular point of view and a chapter that's potentially 20, 30 pages long, and you get to that mode where you're like, yep, if I start this now, I'll be done in mid-July. And, you know, and because those books are stupid long.
Yeah.
You know, and I think for ease of readership and, just to keep a lot of it in your head, that that working in smaller bits as a writer is just so much smarter.
Yeah, Aftermath is a lot like that.
Yeah.
It's got interludes in which are at pretty good breaks in the action, and but there again, even the interludes. Now he's using a universe that's done right, so his interludes have Han and Chewie in one of them, Han Solo and Chewbacca in one of them. They have,
because no one knows who Han and Chewie would
just
be.
in case.
Yeah,
they have Admiral Akbar in a few of them. So these are all characters you're aware of, at least. A lot of them are. But he gets to spend a little time talking about something that's going on in the universe. And I'm sure, in a few weeks when The Force Awakens come out, some of this stuff will matter. But as the book went along, none of it made any difference to the story of Aftermath. Some of the Admiral Akbar stuff did, but most of the other stuff did not. So, but in each and every one of those, you either had characters you knew of, or he spent just enough time that you got to see, okay, these are three desperate characters, and they're trying to break out of a prison. What's going to happen here? Or whatever. So it was always kind of, the spotlight comes on, and there's action from the characters right away, and it was all that quick little successive things that really moved it along pretty good.
That brings up one book I know you would probably get a real kick out of. I enjoyed it thoroughly too. Soon I'll Be Invincible by Austin Grossman. Fascinating book, and it's kind of that same way where it breaks down each chapter. I mean, starting off, you've got your villain character. It's all superhero based. It's your villain character, and you've got your several members of this superhero team trying to form. And each chapter is from the point of view of a different one of these, and it recycles back in. So you have chapter one's the villain, then you've got a couple of these guys, then another with a villain, and all in each one of these, every chapter is all kind of building, and you're kind of jumping around so much when you first start reading it. You're just kind of like, okay, why are we jumping here now? Okay, we're going to talk to this guy for a while, whatever. But then in all those stories all interweave beautifully to a final crescendo at the end of the book that was absolutely terrific. But the character development in those within each of those characters was brilliant. It was handled. You really learned a lot about the internal monologues of each of these characters. You got a feel for who they were. The one girl who's doesn't she's half cyborg and she's trying to find a way to fit in with these. It was a really interesting book, but I said a lot of fun. One I would definitely recommend.
Yeah, I'll check it out. I know that one thing about comic books, or at least comic book related superhero related properties, although they used to do this a lot in the old EQ horror comics, was the internalization, the thought processes of the characters. Nowadays it's not as prevalent as it used to be. You don't see thought bubbles in comics. You do see captions that have now become the new thought bubbles. But you could very quickly you could very quickly develop a character in comics, especially back in ye olde days, just by clever use of internal monologuing.
Right. And it's one of those things where, and I'll be first openly to admit this, I don't read a lot of fiction. I know as a writing community that's kind of it's not a good thing to admit to.
It's storytelling,
but it's one of those things where I'm much more as a study of character. One of the things that I find fascinating, one of the best ways to really kind of get a feel for how to develop a character, is autobiographicals, because you know who this person is. You pick up a book, there's by Gene Simmons, whatever. You pick it up and you start reading it. The entirety, you already know who the guy is. So the entire book is literally nothing but character development. It is all tales of their past and what's happened and how they've become the person they've become. So it's literally an entire book of character development of a person, of an individual. You already know who they are, if you bought the book, hopefully.
Right.
It's one of the greatest ways to kind of look and really kind of break down, because you see the stories they tell and how that makes them a real person as opposed to this celebrity we put up on a shelf.
Right.
It's a fascinating way to really kind of get into the mind of somebody, and that's a good way to kind of look at how you can develop your own characters, is even by looking at how these people are telling their stories.
I can see that now that I think about it, because I'm a big fan of Stephen Fry, and I've read the 2 of his autobiographies. He sort of staggered them into multiple books. And yeah, like now that I think about it, that's basically all that is character development.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cash by Johnny Cash.
There you go.
It's a good one. Same way. I mean, it's one of those where it starts with a story and then it gets into, you know, how he grew up and everything like that. But it's all the fine details, you know, the what made him who he was,
right?
And everything. So yeah, that's a great point. I never thought about that much.
Yeah, I know that. For example, when you know I'm working on characters, one of the things that, depending on the genre, obviously, like if you're developing stuff for like superhero fare, you kind of you don't, because so many things are stereotypical and so many things are derivatively iconic, you know, that you can't really lay claim to a lot, you know, and that was one of the things that harkens back to a conversation we had what feels like ages ago, but it wasn't, where you were talking about young guys getting into the wrestling game and coming in thinking that they're going to reinvent the wheel as far as character development, story development, you know, match development, and how you would just consistently be like, no. Yeah. Like, you're not going to be the one who completely reinvents the wheel here. And, you know, and that's one of the things that it is tough for writers to get that through their head, you know, because so many writers will look at what they've done and say, you know, it's too much like Tolkien, or it's too much like this, or, you know, and you do have to kind of walk up, slap him in the face and say, you're not going to be the one who reinvents the great American novel, you know, and I'm not saying that to be shitty, but the truth is that chances are you're not, you know, you're not David Foster Wallace here. No. You're not, you know, you're going to come in and you're going to do stuff, and there's always going to be derivative material. Oh yeah. The trick is that you have to own the hell out of it.
Yes.
Well, the problem is that even a lot of those, I mean, going back to make the example of the wrestling stuff with the newer kids and everything, it's amazing how many times that these people have that type of an attitude, but then when it's actually put out there and it's a matter of being called on it to say, okay, here's your chance to deliver, they can't. That was one of the things that I found so thoroughly frustrating when I was doing the photography work for you guys and doing the photo shoots for the wrestlers. It would kill me every goddamn time. They would come up and I'd be sitting there all day waiting. They'd dick around until they finally came over to actually get the pictures done, and then it was like, okay, what do you want me to do? I don't know. It's your fucking character. This is your chance to put your character out there and show the world what it is. Right. I'm just here to take the picture. Yeah. And they would ask. They were constantly. I don't know. I hate this part. What do I do? You want me to just? I'm just stand like this. Whatever. Okay, fucking here.
Yeah, it's like you hate this. You hate getting your picture taken,
but this is part of the deal.
Perform in front of 100 people or whatever, and there's nothing to it.
And this is a chance to portray your character in a one picture shot, because as a rule most people are going to know whether or not they like you or they don't before you ever get to the ring.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. So it's in that regard, you got a picture. Here's a chance to convey a character.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's mind-boggling, but you know, it's funny, like with wrestling, character development is so dumbed down. Because especially on a level where I've wrestled, you only got to do one of two things. You got to get them to hate you or love you.
Right.
There's all kinds of nuance to what goes on when you're telling a story of a match, but the initial reaction, if your job is to go out there and be the bad guy, the heel, then you go out there and you can get them to turn on you right away. If you can't, you shouldn't be a bad guy, because they're not going to root for the good guy if
Yeah.
they can't root against the bad guy, basically.
Right.
But so it's really a dumbed down version of everything.
But sometimes you have to take that swerve, and before you can get back to the other side. You look at a wrestler like Dwayne Johnson. Rocky Maivia was a fucking terrible character that nobody liked.
Yeah.
And then when he became The Rock and kind of turned to make a heel turn, people fell in love with it.
Yes.
And then he was able to make that face turn and really have that pop that you want.
Right.
But if you don't make that change because you do realize this isn't working anymore.
But he also went from being a cartoon character basically to being a real jerk.
Exactly.
And then still being a real jerk, not changing at all.
Yeah.
Just changing the person that he was fighting.
Right.
And that person being
But you have to have that moment of realization that
Right.
the blue chipper wasn't going to work for
Right,
you.
right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's wrestling's for booger eaters, I get it, but there's a lot to character and storytelling.
It is, very
in
much
it.
so.
And that's something we can uncover probably in a whole episode sometime we've talked about. So
Let me know when that episode's coming up.
I will.
I'll schedule a nap for that.
Be like me sitting here through comic.
Now us booger eaters, we can talk about wrestling all day.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, for sure. One thing that I found, for this kind of goes back to the character growth thing a little bit, but you can't just throw them out there. They have to face trials along the way, right? They can't just start walking and get from point A to point B and then be there.
Right.
And then here's your big bad fight or whatever. There's got to be trials along the way. And you can insert your character development in there. So you're going to show the reader, hey, this character is who he is right now. And by the end of this, he's going to be somebody completely different.
right.
And all of this detail is a part of this journey. All of this growth and all these trials are going to contribute to who he becomes in the end.
Right.
And I noticed that was a big textbook. Make sure that they get dirty. Get your characters dirty. Make them face trials.
Even
make them face conflict. All that stuff.
In TV series, I mean, we've discussed TV series lately, and the way television has kind of geared itself now, especially with some of the comic book shows like Jessica Jones, which is a prime example of exactly that. When you have that time period, if you're actually watched the series, I mean, you've got 13 episodes to work with, and you've got a lot of it is character development throughout the episodes. You learn why this character, why is she such a bitch? Why is she like this to all these people? What happened to her in the past? What is her connection to the big bad guy that she's going to face at the end? And coming out of it completely different with a different mentality. It's exactly that. You're seeing that growth of character within a first season of a series.
Yeah.
And we see that a lot. Arrow is doing that with all the back, the flashbacks you get. Those are character development moments. These are things that let you know who this character is now, so that way you're not just jumping. Because yes, it's starting off with him being Green Arrow essentially.
I think that is something that we should kind of delve into a little bit right now. Is the flashback. The humble flashback is pretty important.
It's a key character development tool.
I mean, and it is something that's kind of considered somewhat trite and kind of a cliche. Yeah, and maybe something that someone who doesn't know what they're doing is going to fall back on. But at the same time, I can go back and I can think of Robert Heinlein. Stranger in a Strange Land. I don't know if you guys have ever read that one, but it uses some pretty clever flashbacks for the Michael Valentine character, the first Martian, who's a human born on Mars, the first human born on Mars, and flashbacks, they might not necessarily lend your work to becoming published by one of the huge companies, your Penguins, your Tors, your Avon, all that, all those publishers that are looking for quote unquote professional work. But, if you're smart and you're just looking to tell your own story, a couple of clever flashbacks are going to, or could at least potentially make or break, your character development. You have a good scene, but you don't know where to put it. Make it a flashback, especially if there's some character development in it, there's some character growth, and even if it's just something amusing, something that's just a cheap laugh, don't be afraid to use that for a flashback, because there's nothing more endearing to a reader than a character that can make you laugh. Mm-hmm. Like if you can get an actual out loud laugh from somebody during, a scene, then they're going to remember that for years and years and years. Yeah. And I think just the idea of, defying what the so-called professionals are telling you, don't start your story off with your character waking up. That's so noobish. Well, you know what? That's what I did. If you want to introduce your character to a whole bunch of people who have no idea who they are, what better way?
You all wake up on that ship
everybody.
somewhere.
Yeah, everybody wakes up every day. If you don't, well, something's wrong.
Yeah,
and
you don't wake up. There is no story.
Yeah. and and then it's like, oh well, don't have your character rushing to do something, right away in the story. Well, you know what? That's the second scene in my book, is the character having woken up, gotten dressed, all that shit. We follow her through that process, just as character development, because I thought that it was interesting to develop the character from the point where she wakes up and you follow her into the bathroom where she takes a piss just like everyone does first thing in the morning, and then and all she's doing is doing the toilet thing where the toilet's cold, and then turning on the hot water and letting it get hot while she starts to brush her teeth. And my character is so kind of internally neurotic that it's 3 on one side, 3 on the other, 3 in the front, 3 on the tongue, repeat 3 times. She's finished, rinse. Now she goes to get into the shower. But as
a character develops, right there though, you instantly get that, okay, there's an OCD issue here.
Yeah.
That's an instantaneous thing that you've now learned about that character.
Yeah. And I didn't have to tell you that.
Exactly. Well, the other thing too is, going back to the very beginning of the discussion, was everyone recognizes it right away. We all know what she's, she's
we
sitting
know the
on
routine.
a cold toilet seat. We're getting up. We're, we got this whole routine.
Yeah.
We all know this. Yeah, I don't know or understand the rules. I remember reading years ago about script writing and screenwriting, not to use flashbacks. And I was always like, I think there's flashbacks in every movie I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I mean, all of them.
Well, see, and I take...
Like, is this a new rule? Or?
Yeah. See, and I always take real issue with that one word right there. Rule.
Sure, yeah.
It's in any art form.
That was my word.
I understand, but there are people who use that terminology a lot. That they're, okay, these are the rules to doing this. It's like, no, it's art. It should be, every individual is going to be different with it, and should be
I
okay.
think what a lot of people look for is when things become cliche, that it becomes, in quotations, the rule to not do that because it gets done a lot. And I think we've spoken about this before. Is the reason why it gets done a lot is because it works.
It works, exactly.
It's a great way to introduce your character. I mean, one of my favorite things to read about is a story like a Rocky. This guy's going to get over somehow. But what I love more than that is a story about a dude who is so far down on his luck. He is, Schwarzenegger at the beginning of, what was it? I don't remember, but he wakes up, he walks in, and he's got the blender, and he pours half a beer from the night before in the
base.
blender. Yeah, and then he puts a piece of pizza in it, and then he drops all sorts of just crap in it, and then he starts it up, and he pours it into a cup, and he starts drinking it. And I'm just like, this is a dude who is as low as he can possibly be. Like, his life is shit right now. But by the end of this story, he's going to have one-upped his life somehow. And I love that. That's my favorite kind of story. And I think that's almost across the board. I think almost everyone loves that kind of story.
Yes.
That's one of the reasons why Rocky remains one of the greatest movies to watch ever.
It is the, I mean, the underdog story is cliche.
Yeah.
Just like all these other rules that you shouldn't break. But yet it gets used over and over and over again because it works. Mm-hmm. It's how we've been telling stories forever.
Yeah.
About the underdog.
Yeah. Overcoming
the big bad or whatever, overcoming the establishment or whatever.
Whatever it may be.
That is just always. I mean, a lot of times that is a part of the story, and that's what people love. A lot of people love.
It always makes me crazy when I'll jump on YouTube to do research or just look at hot girls, and and I'll see stuff that is basically like top 10 things not to do with your script, 5 things not to do, five cliche things to never do with your novel. And I'll read these things and I'll just be like, well, shit, man, I'm doing all of these things. Like, I'm not, and I'm so far along, I can't go back and change it.
Yeah.
And I'm saying to myself, but like, Rocky did this.
Yeah.
Or Matrix did this, or Superman did this, or Pulp Fiction did this, and I'm pretty sure that these things are pretty cool. Like I don't think that I'm fishing in a dead pond here. Like I'm pretty sure that if I'm going to be accused of being derivative, then I would rather be accused of being derivative of something that's awesome than something that's stupid.
Yeah.
And uninspired, and for the sake of avant-gardeness, like I don't care about that.
Yeah.
Like with Autumnville, I'm not trying to write the great American novel. I'm trying to write a pulp style potboiler. Like I'm not trying to write anything that's going to make you walk away with a completely different perspective on life. Like I want you to read it and go, man, you know what, that was fun. These characters are a blast. Like I would want to hang out with these guys. I mean, not when crazy monsters attack and blood flies everywhere and there's arms and fingers falling out of the sky, but these guys are cool. I like these guys. And that's one of the things about like Supernatural, that at its best, you have that kind of camaraderie where you go, you know what? Yeah, Dean is a dick, but he's our dick. I like him.
I'd hang out with him.
Yeah, Sammy. Well, he's
not so. He's a bit of a whiny bitch.
Yeah, he's kind of whiny, but he is badass though. Yeah. And so. And no matter where he goes, women seem to be falling over him.
Well,
so it's like he can't really be that bad. So and you still have that kind of I don't know what the word is, but that sort of synergy with these characters of going, man, I love these guys. Like I'll follow them to hell and back if I have to. And that's. I think that's some of the best reading, is when you find characters that, like I'm a big fan of the Warren Murphy and Richard Sapir character, Remo Williams and Chun. At one point in time, I had over 200 of those books, and I read every single one of them multiple times. I was obsessed with them, and because those characters are geniusly fun, and just as the writers, I would love. I think Warren Murphy has passed away. I don't know about Richard Sapir, but or I think it's the other way around. I think Richard Sapir passed away, but whichever one of them is still alive, I would love to be able to walk up to that guy and just shake his hand and just say, you know what, thank you. I don't know if you get told this enough during your day, but thank you so much for what you've done. That those books are incredible. And just drop the mic, walk away. I would love to be able to do that. And I think that that's what most writers want, honestly, at the end of the day, to be able to develop characters that people genuinely, grow to care about. Yes.
And that can even happen on a larger scale. It's one of the things, too, when you look at, larger projects and the world building aspects. Mm-hmm. The background characters, there's so much you can do with those. A prime example for me, the Star Wars universe, which, like I said, I know you'll all be discussing a lot next week, but one of the most fascinating things about Star Wars that I've always loved, as far as the novelizations, were the Tales of series. Mm-hmm. I thought were amazing because it didn't change the story or the base Star Wars film, mm-hmm. but it really kind of gave you so much more depth to the movie. When you read the Tales of the Mos Eisley Cantina, mm-hmm. which is just a collection of short stories about all the different background characters, the other characters that were in the cantina at that moment. Mm-hmm. So you learn why were they there. The Hammerhead character for one. Mm-hmm. You watch the movie the first time, you just kind of go, oh, there's a guy with a hammerhead shape.
Oh, the Ithorian, yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Ithorian, yeah. But it was always then you read Tales from Mos Eisley Cantina. There's this whole story about him. It's
mm-hmm.
His name is Momon Dadan. Okay, he's there. Even though they're a peaceful race, he's there to murder somebody. Mm-hmm. That's the whole reason he's in the canteen at that moment. And when you start getting these background stories of all these characters, and then you go back and watch the movie again, it gives you a whole new perspective of this hive of villainy mm-hmm. that they're in. Tales of the Bounty Hunters, same thing. The IG-88 story I found fascinating mm-hmm. about this sentient robot really coming into world, figuring ways to rule the galaxy. It was just fascinating the way they did it, and the intersections. With Zuckuss and Forlom and them chasing after Boba Fett, realizing he knows something that they don't know about hunting down Han Solo. But it doesn't change the film, but it changes your perception of it all when you watch it. That's a huge aspect, too. You can have so much more fun
with becoming more informed on the background makes you appreciate the foreground. Right. It really does.
But it also gives you tons of fresh canvases to work with, because you can take some of those characters, and even though you have your main story, New Hope, you've got your story, you've got your film and everything done. Then you can play with these other characters, mm-hmm. and if people are interested enough, people will buy the books and will read them, and just get those belly laughs out of some of those characters, and it just adds to. And that it also pads the world itself and gives you so much more definition. And the Star Wars universe has done amazing jobs with that. There are so many books about characters outside of the films, but it all ties in. Yeah,
and I don't want to jump off on this tangent just yet. This is for next week,
right?
Just the fact that they got rid of the Thrawn trilogy just by annihilating the book canon universe,
right?
The expanded universe, and then go, nope, we're getting rid of it, we're starting over. It's like, I don't think you understand how badass the Thrawn trilogy was. If you did, you would say everything gone but Dark Force and Thrawn trilogy. We're leaving those behind because they're badass. Everything else, not so much. I would be fine with that, but regardless, I think though that one of the things with Friday Night Rights that I do, because I'm fortunate enough that I have a massive stable of characters, is that one of the things that I've been kind of meaning to do is to do more stories about my background characters, like Hijack, like Ned, all those guys from that crew.
And who am I again?
Your character comes in. The character that's based on you comes in roughly the sort of middle ground of the second book, because at the end of the first book, Vic makes mention of his cousin moving up to Autumnville from Texas. And just like he did in real life.
So it's a direct, yeah.
Yeah, just like he did in real life. And Lowell going, okay, so how are we, what are we going to turn him into? And, and everybody, going, well, we could do this, we could do that, and Vic being like, yeah, I don't think tearing him apart and putting him back together is going to make his wife very happy. So, golems are out, we're not turning him into a Frankenstein, all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, one of the things though that I do really, really want to do with the Friday Night Writes short fiction with the prompts is to develop my B and C cast really heavily, so that when they do pop up in the main books, if you've read the short stories, you're going to go, oh, that's Hijack, that's the weird toothless guy that's covered in filthy tattoos and has a lisp and is weird, like he's very, very creepy. Or here's Ned, this weird old redneck who runs a bar that also does professional wrestling, and all that kind of stuff. And I look forward to being able to develop these characters in such a way that highlights the people who helped create the characters, and and just sort of bring back some of the enjoyment of those old days where we were goofing off every week, and just having a good time. Like for me, not letting those characters die is important. And just keeping that candle lit and just kind of filling up that background space, so that once Ned shows up into the main story, if you've read any of the stuff on Friday Night Writes, you'll go, oh, that's that guy.
That's the redneck.
Yeah, he looks like Vic Tayback from Alice.
I bet you 5 people got that reference.
Maybe. But it's good enough for me.
The only other thing I really got is that, take care of your characters. Do the due diligence on them. Develop them, because they should be driving every aspect of your story through their actions and their dialogue. Narration and exposition just kind of loses your reader. In my opinion, my favorite books, the books that I like the most, are the ones with characters that I'm like, I think of when I think of that book, not of the way an alley was described to me.
Yeah.
I think that...
Yeah, so you're saying Anne Rice loses you a little bit.
Yes. William Gibson. I like William Gibson.
Yeah.
I like that cyberpunk stuff. I like all that, but I don't need 4 paragraphs of description of a bed.
Yeah.
Like that. You could just say it's a bed.
Yeah.
And just leave it at that.
Yeah.
That type of thing just is not my favorite.
Yeah.
But to me, character is what all your story's about anyway. Mm-hmm. So take care in making them have and giving them depth and making them somebody to like or to root for, or to make them detestable or despicable.
Yeah.
And I guess we didn't really hit that either, but we've talked about that before, like with world building. Make your villains worth something.
Yeah.
Well,
like make them substantially like somebody that
well, it's the argument that when you say villain, it's kind of interesting. There was a documentary that I'd watched called Necessary Evil. It was about comic book villains. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the things that I kind of realized is it was something that made me kind of rethink a lot about characterization, is the fact that when we think about the terms antagonist and protagonist,
well,
the protagonist is who moves the story along. The antagonist is trying to stop the story.
Right.
So in reality, the villain is really your protagonist. Without those villainous moves, without him doing something, the hero has nothing to accomplish. Right. So it's kind of an interesting way to view that.
Right.
So you really need to develop that villain.
Well, one of the key things, though, is that when you are in your pre-writing or pre-development stages and you are putting things together, one of the really, really important things to do is once you've developed that plot line with your character and you've developed your villain, etc., then one of the things that is really vitally important is to stop what you're doing and then throw everything into reverse and now get into the villain's shoes and now work the story from his perspective from beginning to end, and then find out where your hero and your villain are going to collide. Because once you've got your hero plotted out, then you start working on that villain, and as you're developing him, his story needs to either run parallel or away from, or if you're particularly kind of risky as a writer, you can run it like two freight trains on the same track running right at each other. But that just sort of lends itself towards a sort of massive collision and then not a whole lot afterwards.
Right.
But yeah, like when you are developing, it is really important to take your villains, no matter how many of them there are, and then work their storyline. And we've discussed the therefore method before, is because one of the things that as your hero is doing things, he's doing things, A plus B, therefore C. And so every move he's making is a therefore. And your bad guys have to be doing exactly the same thing. And so that might mean that there are a lot of near misses. But once those therefores do collide, then you're going to have a really, frankly, a more realistic setup than having it be like, bad guys, are at this particular place. My hero finds out about it. He flies over there and catches them just as they're getting ready to leave after robbing the bank. Okay, well, that's cool. In some circumstances, that's fine. But that's really not, like if you're writing something epic or you're writing something that's genuinely there to sort of tantalize the reader, like you want everything to be there for a reason.
Yeah.
Every villain's actions or every antagonist's action has to have purpose, and that is something that does kind of get lost if you're doing the hero's journey, because you tend to look at it just from the hero's perspective. And so you're just like, well, the villain needs to show up here, here, and here.
Yeah.
And, and that is a problem. And that is a problem in Star Wars that I will probably get to later.
Yeah. Well, your villains, they're, sometimes they're people, but whatever. They have wants. They have a mission, or they have a desire, they have wants, they have personality. They are flawed. They have warts and everything. Like they need to have that fleshing out. Yeah, I think it's really important, not just for your protagonist, but also for your antagonist as well. Mm-hmm. Well, what do you guys think? Did we kind of lay that bare?
I think we covered everything I had.
Fuzz?
And then some.
Yeah, I think we're all right.
You're a character. Skip, you're a character.
I try.
All right. Well, we'll call her an evening then on character development. I wanted to remind everybody real quick once again about our website. It's FridayNightWrites.net, and we're a writing community or storytelling community. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/FNWrites, Twitter at twitter.com/FNWrites, and YouTube at youtube.com/FNWrites. All the podcasts go up on YouTube. Our podcast feed is podcast.fridaynightwrites.net. We're also on iTunes. you can just search for Friday Night Rides Podcast. If you'd like to provide any feedback, comments, hate, love, pictures, anything, please direct those to fnrights@gmail.com. And if you enjoy the podcast, please tell your friends, because that word of mouth would be helpful to us. Or you can leave us a review on iTunes or YouTube and subscribe in both of those places. Next week, Star Wars. Just in time for the release of The Force Awakens, the episode 7.
Which I don't think I'm going to see.
Yeah, you are.
I just don't really care.
There'll be a lot of people that don't see it, I'm sure. It's not going to be a very popular movie. I'm rooting for it to break every record.
I said this like months and months ago that, you know, I'm hopeful that it is a $1 billion weekend film.
Yeah.
Like, I really hope that it just crushes every single record that's ever been done, and you know that it just leaves those dumbass Marvel movies in the dust.
It doesn't matter. The money's all going into the same Disney bank.
Yeah, that is true. But you know, like I would rather Star Wars be at the top of the heap.
Agreed.
So,
well, it's been a whole week since we shat on anything of Marvel, so I'm glad we could provide that service for everybody again. Yeah. Alrighty, well, everybody, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Yep, we'll see you next week.
She's the kind of girl you dream of. Dream of keeping hold of. Better forget it.